Okay, everybody, welcome to Shop Talk Live. As you can see or hear, I am not Ben Strano. I'm Tom McKenna. I'm filling in for Ben this episode. I'm here with Barry Dima and Mike Pekovich.
Hey, guys.
And we're going to talk some woodworking, right? It's been a long time since I've been here, so it may be a little bit rocky, but we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
So I made a mistake again this year.
Oh, no.
I made a bunch of holiday gifts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And I hate it. And I promised myself 2 years ago that I would never do it again.
Why?
What-
They turned
what
out
do you-
really cool.
Why do you hate it?
Because it's just such like a rush. And my family does Christmas in Florida, where my brother and a bunch of other family live.
Yeah.
And so I need to get the gifts done before my parents go to Florida. Because I brought a gift down there before and it kind of exploded with the humidity. So I try to get
Yes.
things done early. And so my Christmas delivery happened Thanksgiving. But when you're thinking about the gifts, you're like, oh, I have until December 24th. No, surprise, end of November.
Well, yeah,
But you're done.
you're done.
I'm done now, yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm not done.
How many more do you have?
I'm not sure. I have targets. Like I know I'm going to finish three items. I'm making trivets of different varieties because that's like the easy. Cutting boards and trivets are like things that I know I can get done in just like a 2 or 3 day time span. You know,
Right.
including finishing and waxing and
Right.
everything. Because I've tried making gifts before. I remember years ago I made my wife Sandy a couple end tables for Christmas, you know, using quotes. And I think I got it to her like maybe for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
That's not bad, though.
No, I finished it, you
Considering.
know. But yeah, I get it. I don't like deadlines, but it's been nice for me. I took some time off around Thanksgiving and just went back in the shop and just kind of immersed myself. And it was cool because the stuff I was building, I wasn't drawing it out. I was sort of like, I built this one end grain trivet, which you'll see in a little while, kind of a butcher block thing. And then I started looking at my other shorts and offcuts, and I said, oh, wait, I can do that, and then I can do that. And so I was just kind of designing as I made. It was kind of fun, really, really liberating. That's what I liked about that process. So it was pressure to get it done in time for Christmas, but not totally pressure, you know.
Yeah, right.
I can always make an IOU out of wood or something. I've done that before where I was trying to make a blanket chest for my sister-in-law for her wedding, and I could not get it done in time. So I whipped out a small dovetail box and gave it to her as kind of an IOU, and you know, the bigger version is on its way. So, well, let's get to some questions.
Yeah. You know what a cool alternative to making something out of wood for people?
What is it, Mike?
Making
Right.
a gift for yourself?
Write a book. And then just stick them in the mail. It
It's not bad.
works out pretty well.
Yeah, all you have to do is sign it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. All right. The first question, this one comes from Matt. And Matt writes, I have seen lots of articles on making and using shooting boards, but I don't understand the theory behind shooting miters. How does the process work? I mean, if I make a mitered frame and the miters aren't perfect, what is the order of operations or the process for shooting them perfectly while maintaining the perfect length of opposite sides? It seems like truing a miter also shortens the piece, which will introduce a new problem, and I'll end up chasing perfection forever. Can you help? I'm reluctant to answer this because I'm not a miter guy. Like I'm not good with them. I've made a few miter boxes, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert on miters.
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. If you're trying to square up or true up the miter, you end up getting shorter. So never, ever true up a miter with a shooting board. Just don't.
Boom.
There you go.
I thought you have one, though. You have one of
Yeah.
those, like,
I do.
carcass shooting boards.
Yeah. I'll get there.
Okay.
Okay, so the notion that you're truing up a miter with a shooting board, that's not what I use it for. So if I'm doing a picture frame or if I'm doing a miter box, I think it's super, super important. I cut them at the table saw, and I work really, really hard to get my angles exact off of the table saw. And the way you go about doing it, if you cut one corner and you put it up, your combo square up to that corner, and it looks really good, it can look perfect. And then you go, oh, I'm going to cut all my pieces now. And then it's always like, well, 3 corners come together.
Yeah, it's that last corner that's always off, right?
So it's like, oh, how did I mess up one corner? Well, that one corner is sort of the multiplied error. Yeah. That's sort of typical. I remember back when we had the shop at the other building and people would be doing miters and they would say, Mike, this is not coming together. What's happening? It's like, well, you're not 45. No, I'm like perfect 45. And you hold up like the combo square. It's like, yeah, no, if you're, if you were perfect, they would all come together. So when you're setting up for miters, like if I'm doing boxes, it sounds like a hassle and a lot of work, but set it up and cut 4 sides all to that angle that you think is 45. Flip them upside down on a table, run some tape across, and bring them together. If that last corner does not come together, your angle's off. And remember that is sort of multiplied by 8, I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So really small adjustments.
No, yeah. I mean, the miters I have cut, I haven't really made many mitered frames, but I've made mitered boxes, and I try to do what you're saying. Everything looks great until you get that last corner done, then it's all wonky.
Yeah,
then it's back to the setup.
You try to true up one corner, and it never. I promise, it never works, and you'll never get there. I remember watching a woodworking show on television a few years back, and the host was making a mitered frame, and it was kind of close. And I just get on my plane here, and I true it up, and I'm thinking, it ain't gonna work, my friend. And it didn't work. So, and then it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll get back to this later. So it's like, yeah. So the idea of truing up a miter with a shooting board, I don't think that's a good idea. I think if you want to, this is not truing up, but if you want to say cut a miter with a shooting board, that's fine. And I know people who do that where, like if you're doing like a really, really thin box parts or something, or partitions, I've done it. I'll cut my parts to exact length with 90-degree ends. And then you can shoot that 90-degree end down to 45, and you're just watching that flat. And so you want to plane until that flat on the end just disappears, so you're not actually shortening anything. That works out pretty well. Where I do shoot miters is, again, if I have a box and I'm making a mitered liner to go inside of the box to act as kind of that lip for the lid to register to, I'll cut my 45s at the table saw with the idea being that they're going to be a little bit big. And now I'll use the shooting board to actually size it. So to your point, it is getting shorter, but it's intentionally getting shorter at this point. So I'll size each piece to fit like individually into their sides, just in case a box might be a little bit off or something like that. So so I think the shooting board is really good for when you
cutting.
Want to size parts, but not necessarily for truing up the miter. I think it's best to get it good right off the saw. Or if you're cutting them with a hand plane, then your parts are to exact length, and you get your blade set up at 45, and then you're taking it to 45, maintaining the same length.
Yeah, I'd rather cut dovetails.
Miter's tough, man. I think miters are far harder than dovetails.
I mean, what he's describing has been my experience with miters. It's like I always wind up chasing it, and once you're way off, sometimes it's just you've got to go back and start from scratch, because I don't know where I started from at a certain point. So dovetails are a lot more fun for me, I think.
I agree.
Anyway.
That's a good question.
No, I got
that's a great question. Yeah. And we did a few years ago. I worked on an article with a few authors about fixing joinery mistakes, and if you're off a little bit, there are some great tips in that article. I wish I'll see if I can get Ben to post the issue number in the article, the real title on it, because there are some great tips on tuning a miter that's just not exactly perfect, and ways to kind of get around it.
Yeah.
So let's get to question number 2. This one comes from John, and John writes, I would like to cut about 20 to 30 circles from 16th inch thick shop sawn veneer to make an inlaid geometrical pattern. The circles are 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter and must fit perfectly into a recess made by a Forstner bit. How would the Shop Talk Live team handle this? Good golly.
I thought about this.
I thought about it too, and I was thinking, wow.
And I have a brilliant solution because it's not my solution.
Is it John Alexander Hernandez?
No.
Is that his name? Oh, all right. That's the guy.
No, unless it's pronounced Kevin Rodell.
No, but I pulled up Kevin too.
Let's not go into how I would go about doing it. It may or may not have worked, but like Kevin's technique will really super work. One of the problems, so what Kevin does is he uses a template, so basically a board with a hole in it, so that's easy to make. And then he uses a straight bit and a guide bushing. So that runs on the inside of this circle. So basically, whatever size you want, you have to account for the diameter of the bit and the diameter of the bushing and figure all that stuff out and just make sure you cut your initial hole big enough to where once you route a little circle, that inside circle is the diameter you want. That's just math.
How do you cut the first circle?
You drill it. Drill it with a big old Forstner.
Big old bit.
Yeah, and you can account for the
Or-
offset of the bushing.
Or
right?
like a wing cutter if
Like
you
a
have
hole
like a
saw
super
maybe
big
or
guy.
something, yeah.
Or hole saw. Perfect, yeah. So you got your circle, you got your guide bushing, and then this is what I was thinking because I kind of got up to there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, okay, you put this down, you have the 16th inch veneer, you start routing. Once that gets loose, I'm afraid that little circle thing is going to like move around and get torn up.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a Kevin Rodell trick because he did an article on this really beautiful arts and crafts inlay on the bed that he did in issue 260, I think. So there's a masterclass in inlay technique. He wasn't doing circles, he was doing these spade shapes, but it's exactly the same technique. So what he does is he got his veneer and glued it to a substrate with a piece of newsprint in between the substrate and the veneer so that he set his bit depth so he's routing into that substrate, probably a piece of MDF or something like that, cutting all the way through the veneer, but the veneer is still attached to the substrate, and then he just got a chisel, and because it's a paper joint, you can just pop that little thing right off. So you could either drill a bunch of holes in a board and route, or route, move it. But either way, you're going to end up with this veneer glued to a substrate with all of these little routed, sort of rings, basically. And then you're just like popping up the centers, and those are your circles.
Yeah. See, I didn't research this. I was just thinking, well, how would I do that? And the only thing I could come up with was to basically, instead of cutting individual circles, I thought, well, maybe the secret is to make basically a piece of dowel stock that matches the diameter, and then you slice
so
it up
it's
there.
ingrained.
But if you don't have a lathe, how do you get to that round diameter?
Yeah.
Unless you buy
enormous dowel plate.
Yeah, right. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, circles are always kind of a bugaboo.
I was thinking for like smaller circles, I have actually a couple sets of those, like the hole punches. I use them for punching out little circles of like suede to cover up magnets.
Oh, like for leather work.
For leather work. I don't know how big of a diameter you can get. I don't think I've ever seen them bigger than, say, 3/4 of an inch. But something like that, that's really cool because you can just punch a hole into the backing veneer, and then you punch a hole into the veneer that's going to fill it. And because you're using the same punch, it should fit right in there.
Oh,
cool.
That's pretty
Or
nifty.
drill it. Yeah, I mean, the outside of the punch is tapered, so you might not get a clean edge. So you might have to like drill it to the diameter, then get a punch of the same diameter, and then punch out your veneers. But again, not to an inch or inch and a half. I'd say maybe up to 3/4 of an inch. I think you might be able to get one. Maybe Google that.
It's got a long road for this guy. 20 to 30, those little circles.
Yikes.
What you making?
Good luck.
What are you doing with your circles?
He's doing a lot. What are you doing with those little circles? But it's cool. Good.
Yeah, good luck. Send a picture, and I want to see what you're making.
Yeah, I'd like to know what he used as a solution too, because it's, the big circles are easy. You can easily set up a trammel and cut and then pattern out. But it's the little guys that are buggy because they're little. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to our first good segment. No, it's going to be a great segment. It's time for the all-time favorite technique of all time for this week. I'm going to throw it to Barry first.
All right. It was from an Andrew Hunter article, his lighter, stronger frame and panels from 262.
Mm-hmm.
And where he does sliding dovetail frame members, like in battens,
battens,
to help lock the panel in place. And he has a setup stick because the dovetail's tapered. He uses a setup stick to figure out the exact width of his router bit to help him set the fence for when he routes on a line. So I was not doing sliding dovetails, but I do mostly handwork. So when I do that, I'm only concerned about one edge and one face being jointed. The other edge, I'm not that concerned about because I'm not a table saw. But when I want to use a router with a edge guide, it makes it harder. Like if I want to come in equal distances from both edges, because I can't flip the piece because that other edge isn't reliable, and that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That I don't really want to do, especially on bigger pieces. So I use Andrew's little setup stick, and to make it, you set up a fence on a sacrificial board and route. And then you take a stick that's squared up at the end and you mark the width of that channel that your bit just left. And then, so now you know the distance from the bit to the edge of the base plate.
Okay.
And then you use that setup stick to set up a fence on your workpiece. And you can route a straight line in any shape of a workpiece without needing a fence attached to the router,
right?
Because it's a secondary fence.
Cool.
And that's let me do a lot with my router that I would have struggled to do otherwise.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty smart.
So it's a really smart way to account for the offset between the edge of your base and the bit.
Right. And there's no math involved like, oh, I know my base is 1 5/16 from the middle of the bit. No, it's what that stick says.
Yes, it's the stick.
Right.
Sticks are awesome.
So, and I feel like Andrew Hunter whenever I'm doing it. So I get my Japanese hammer out to like tap the fence into place. It's very...
Did you get new slippers?
No, I use... Well, yes,
he has
kind
those
of.
great shoes.
I have old... like fuzzy slippers, like that you would slip into, that the sole's ripped off of. They make great shop slippers.
What was the name of that Andrew Hunter article?
Lighter, stronger frame and panels in issue 262.
Yeah. Lighter, stronger frame and panels. It's like, that's the most unassuming title
for
the
what that
most
was.
complex way to make a frame. It's really cool because he uses really light frame members and thin panels, but because these cross members are dovetailed into the panel, it just makes this horrendously rock solid, very elegantly light panel in a horrendously difficult way to make it.
But we make it look really easy.
Yes, we do.
Because he's smiling throughout the whole process.
But he did it on his big armoire. And those doors are 4.5 feet tall?
Yes.
5 feet tall. And I think he said that he could push his body weight from corner to corner and the door wouldn't deflect.
Right.
Like that's how strong it was.
Yeah.
And Andrew's like a grown man.
Cool.
How about you, Mike?
Technique. This is something I use quite a bit, and I'm using it in my current project. I mentioned mitered liners to go on the inside of the box. I also use mitered liners if I'm doing like a little chest with a sliding door and I want internal partitions for little drawers and stuff. It's sort of a variation on the mitered liners inside of a spice box like Steve Ladder would make. Yeah. That's kind of where I got the idea. So I have all these different vertical and horizontal partitions I want to make within a small case, but I kind of don't want to have to deal with it by cutting into the case itself. It can be super hard to get everything aligned. So I just build the case and I do a mitered liner to fit inside the case, and then I can do all my subdivisions into that mitered liner. And it's much easier to do it. And also, I can sort of fine tune what the layout of the different components are after the fact, just with a little piece of MDF stuck in the opening. And also because I'm building basically this little assembly of dividers inside of a stouter case, I can go really, really thin with the components. Okay. So I can have I've gone down to like a 3/16 inch like liner dividers inside of a little case. So it's and then all my drawers go in, and it's just this really fine line between everything. So it's a really cool way to do it. And I'm doing that in a little bit bigger scale. It's a chest on stand, so my dividers are a little bit thicker. They're about 5/16 of an inch. And same thing, big dovetail case with a center divider, and then I make basically instead of mitered, I did 2 dovetailed walnut boxes that slip into each half, and then I was able to do stop dados into both of those to kind of create the basic sub-assemblies. So divide and conquer. Get the case done first, and then just make a little internal thing and slip it in and make everything from there.
Yeah, I've been watching you on Instagram with the videos you posted on that, and I love that idea, and I wish I had come up with it before you did, because when I made this cabinet on stand a couple of years ago, I had one drawer pocket, and just for that one shelf in there and trying to get the divider glued up, get the whole case glued up and keep the case square, and then have to try to slide in another piece for the shelf into a stop dado. It made the glue up so much more complex. And, even being bald, it was hair raising. So it was just, I love the idea of making those sub assemblies. And,
really cool.
they're so helpful, it looks like. And it's simplifies your life, right?
Yeah, that was that one photo that I sent you, Jeff.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, I have kind of a controversial technique.
What?
Yeah,
that's what I'm waiting
it's
for.
going to be ugly because I think it was a couple years ago, maybe it was a year ago. We were on a podcast one time, and a question came in about whether this person was making a cutting board, end grain cutting board, and his question was, "Can I run this through my planer?"
Right.
And we were like, "No, don't do that.
I've
don't
seen people
do that."
it.
Well, I did it.
Wait, do you have a helical head or straight eyes?
And it worked. It defies logic, and I was worried about doing it, but I'm making, for these Christmas gifts, one of the things I'm making is an end grain trivet. Hold on.
What about the tailing edge? Do you need chip out on that at all?
Well, that's what I was worried about.
Yeah.
So it's a little thing that I'm making, and what happened is the glue up was okay.
I like the feet.
But little ebony feet. Yeah. But I wound up chasing my tail trying to get it flat because it kept rocking on me, and I couldn't cut. If you're not watching, it's a little end grain cutting board trivet, but it has a strip of ebony as feet, and I couldn't cut that dado for the strip without having a perfectly flat bottom.
Oh, right.
So I wound up chasing my tail. I'd get one side close, and then I'd work on the other, and it was just it kept rocking, and I was sort of deadline oriented, getting I want my shop time to be fun. So I thought, well, what the hell? I'm going to try it. So what I did is I took a thin slice off on my bandsaw to try to get one side level, and then I hand planed that edge to get it so it wasn't rocking. I still had some rough saw marks on that face. And then I put that face down on the planer bed, wet the top portion with naphtha. And then I put it in on an angle. So I fed it like that, diagonally. And I still was expecting the whole thing to blow up on me.
I was 6 by 6. You didn't put this little thing through your planer, did you?
Yes. It was a little bit bigger.
Okay.
So here's the thing. It was a little bit bigger, but I anticipate one of the reasons I was able to do it, I was thinking, well, if anything drastic happens, I can just trim it off.
Yeah.
And so I put it in diagonally, and I mean really tiny, tiny passes,
Okay.
like barely an eighth of a turn
Yeah.
each time, and it would go through, and I kept waiting for this corner to like just kick out on me, and lo and behold, it never happened.
Cool.
Nice.
And all it did, I wasn't pushing my luck, I wasn't looking for like a full pass.
Right.
Once I had it, all those saw marks removed and it felt level, then I was able to flip it and wet the other side and make more light
Okay.
passes. And then it was 220 and 320 grit sandpaper, and it was perfectly flat. But I did have some chip out on the back corners, but it wasn't anything what I expected.
Yeah, I would think like a full height blowout kind of a thing.
I was like, that's what I was expecting. I'm thinking the whole time I'm doing it, it's like, well, I have more scraps. But I think I think the advice, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to people as good practice, but, I have a very simple Grizzly lunchbox planer, and it doesn't even have dust collection, but this thing is one of the best machines, I think, out there. I don't know if they still make it. It's the model G0663. Doesn't have dust collection, which is sort of a problem at times, but this thing works like a charm.
Cool.
It's really, really good. And so I didn't get a whole lot of blowout, but I did get some. And so what I did is I just went around and I trimmed it. And you can see like the outside rim of squares is a little bit narrower. But I think if I were doing this type of project again, and I will, I think what I'll do is I'll just make it purposefully bigger and do the same thing. And if I get a drastic blowout, I can just cut it off and move on. But I honestly, I really didn't think it was going to survive. And like you said, it's even a short piece, but putting it in diagonally, it lengthened it a little
you're
bit.
working the
and
hypotenuse.
it's also it's a kind of a sheer angle that you're cutting at.
I was thinking as I was doing it, but I was also not optimistic that it was
Right.
going to work. But it worked, and so I feel like, boy, this is kind of interesting
Good deal.
that it worked. But anyway, I don't know if it would work for every planer. I mean, I did have pretty fresh knives in, so I think that would be super important. And like, I think the biggest thing is just pushing the lever to lower the cutter just a little bit at a time. So it'd be like zip, zip,
Yeah.
and then eventually get this nice, zzz, and then I'm done with no at the end,
Right.
which is what I was expecting to happen. Anyway, so
Yeah, you put it in one end and nothing comes out the other.
that's kind of what I was thinking. But
Cool.
I was happy it worked out.
Yeah.
So, if you've got, like I said, if you want to do this or experiment with it, I would recommend, just in case, making it your board a little bit bigger, because I don't know, maybe every planer operates differently, or if you happen to have a dull knife in there, maybe it would, kick out a block or
Yeah. Well, this
an inch,
thing's
but
6x6, so you do something 6x18, run
right.
it through, and then you've got 3 with some room to trim
that's
off
even
or
better.
something.
Because I would hate to do that glue up. This glue up was enough of a bear.
Yeah.
Just in these little things, because I do it in sections. Because the first time I made an end grain cutting board, I tried gluing it all up at once, and it was a nightmare. I think I lost like 5 years of my life. But anyway, so
Cool. I had a commission from hell once where that's why I take no commissions ever anymore. I used to make a bunch of cutting boards for holiday gifts and stuff, and someone called up and said, "Oh, can you make me a cutting board for a wedding gift to give to people?" And it's like, I don't do cutting boards, but it was like, a child of a friend, kind of, it was like there's enough of a connection. It was like, fine, okay, what do you want? Just, something, just like the strips of wood, something like you made for us. And I thought, okay. But because it was like a wedding gift, I didn't want to just do like the long grain strips of wood. So I did that, and then I cut it and I re-glued it as this end grain. And it was like the most beautiful cutting board I'd ever made, and spent way more time than I should have based on what I was getting paid for it. And I delivered it, and they go, I really just wanted like the strips of wood. I'm sure you can sell this because it's so nice. Can you just make the one I wanted? And I just was like, are you kidding me? But I ended up making it, and it was, so.
But there was a happy ending to the end grain one, right?
yeah, what'd you do with that?
I sold it to Anissa because she was going to a wedding. She goes, I'll take that.
Now, how did you plane? Did you just hand plane the end grain? Do you remember how you did it? How you
I
leveled?
think I just hand planed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which there, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I have a low angle plane. It was working great, but this is one of the blocks in here is Babinga, and it's Babinga and maple, and man, it just was not easy cutting. I think that's part of my problem because I made a previous one and I didn't use my planer. I was able to flatten it with my low angle plane.
Yeah.
Pretty easily. Although I still moisten the fibers a little bit with naphtha when I plane the end grain, even by hand.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think Chris Gochner told me I should do it, so I did it. It seemed to help. Anyway,
cool.
We're going to take a quick break. Hang in there. Barry's going to take a walk.
When you're in the middle of a long sanding session, inevitably you're going to start to think, I wonder if this sanding disc is old and used up. And I found that the best time to switch to a new sanding disc is the moment you think about it. Every second after that is wasted time. Maverick Abrasives is a family-run manufacturer of all things abrasives, such as sanding belts and sanding discs. Their manufacturing facility is located in Anaheim, California, where knowledgeable experts are on call Monday through Friday to answer any sanding or finishing questions you have. Head on over to maverickabrasives.com and check out their wide assortment of sanding discs. They've got you covered with the best prices on the web, whether you use 5-hole, 8-hole, or festool-hole pattern discs. To top it off, they have free shipping on orders of $200 or more. So join fellow Mavericks Ramon Valdez and Philip Morley and stock up at maverickabrasives.com today.
All right, this question is from Andrew. I sharpen with DMT diamond plates and king whetstones using the Veritas honing guide. I don't think I could ask for better equipment, but when I finish the sharpening routine using either method, I find very small chips come out of the very tip of the blade I've sharpened. I've tried pressing softer on the tip, but this doesn't seem to make a difference. Could it be that I'm doing the back of the blade between each grit and that pulling off the burr is somehow causing these small chips? Any thoughts or ideas? ? And he has a related question, but what lubrication do you use with diamond plates?
Water.
So is this a either or? Is he using diamond plates and then water stones, or is he doing diamond plates?
It was kind of hard to tell from the question. Maybe he's flattening with the diamond plates.
I don't know.
I can't tell, but either way, he's winding up with little nicks, I guess, on the tip of the blade. And I use the Veritas honing guide as well, and it is a very sound system. I wonder if he's just leaving grit from the previous stone on the finer stone, because I've had that. I have a common bath for my water stones. I have Norton stones that you have to soak.
Yeah.
But every time I pull them out of the bath, I rinse it off before I start using it.
Yeah.
And then between grits, I take my honing guide and I give the wheel a quick rinse.
Yeah.
Because it's, possible that you could create some sort of a scratch or something.
I just have a separate honing guide for every grit I use.
That's the solution. But that's the only thing when I was thinking about it, that's about the only thing I could think of. It doesn't sound like his method is awry, but maybe it is. I don't know.
What do you think, Barry?
I'm wondering if he's too aggressive with the burr. I don't think the problem is him removing the burr after every grit. I wonder if he's trying to take it all off in one swipe, just like angrily pulling off that burr instead of easing it off of the blade. That's the only thing that came to mind aside from cross-contaminate. But
that's the only I could think of cross-contamination, but he specifically said he's not pressing too hard. But.
Yeah, the cross-contamination, I think typically it would show up as just really fine scratches on the polished bevel, which that can also be other things. That could also just be coarser scratches you didn't actually get rid of, and they just don't show up until you hit your final polish. One of three things. One, it could be like a really heavy scratch left over from a diamond plate, which because of the way that the diamonds are adhered to the plate, they can be a equally fine grit, but they're not necessarily in the same plane. So you can get grits up that leave deeper scratches, which are more difficult to get rid of, which is why I don't use diamond plates at all for honing. So it's either deep scratches left over from a honing plate. It could be you didn't go back far enough and the chips are left over from before you sharpen. And then the third thing is this, the burr. Don't mess with the burr ever. Don't pull it off. Let it abrade away. And also, I really don't recommend flattening the back with every grit as you go.
I made an assumption.
I mean, I take my back to the final polish, say it's 8,000 grit stone or whatever that is, and then you're just honing the bevel from whatever grits you go through. And the final burr typically abrades away by the time you get to your final polish, or if it's still there, then flip it over and polish the back, and that little kind of thin fingernail of a burr, if it's there, will sort of fall off on its own. But if you do pull it off at any given time, you can create little scallops in there.
Yeah, I used to remove the burr after every grit, and I don't remember who told me to stop doing it because it didn't do any good. Because you shouldn't really be creating this huge burr as you sharpen anyway. You
get it like right off the grinder. You're going to have a heavy burr. That's the only one I'll see. Normally, if I go to rehone, I'll start with my 1,000 grit waterstone, and it's just enough to feel. You'll feel the burr, but it's not going to leave that wire edge that will sort of abrade off.
So I don't take off the burr after every grit. Like, go to hit my 1,000 on the bevel, then go to the back at the 8, go to the 4 on the bevel, then I don't do that. But someone who taught me sharpening, and I did not follow subsequently, said, take off on your finest stone, take the burr off of the back after every grit. So so at the 1,000 you make a burr, knock it off on the 8 or whatever your finest stone is. Then when you come back to your next stone, let's say 4, you'll have no burr from the 1. So when the 4 makes the burr. So you go, oh, everything is equally polished up to the edge. Knock off the burr. I don't do it. But I'm not.
I hit the back just on when I've got the final polish, I take a few swipes on the back and that's the last step. And, I think it's just habit, but
I think the harder you work sharpening, the less happy you're going to be with how sharp you are.
Yeah.
Should be once your tool's in good condition, that's the toughest thing is once you get sharp, it's super easy to get sharp again.
Yes,
if you're really out of whack, you have a rounded over back or, you're dubbing things over because you're using honing compound on leather or something. It just makes getting sharp again super, super hard. So come up with a really, really simple routine that gets you sharp enough to do the work you want to do, and
don't overthink it.
Listen to
Barry.
I didn't do it.
I love the Krenov theory about sharpening. He talked about, don't sweat it too much, get it sharp enough for your tools to work properly and don't go crazy with it.
Yeah, he used oil stones and he didn't use a honing guide. It's like, how sharp were you really?
And he used dowels. No, I'm kidding.
I'm pretty sure he was really sharp.
Yeah, I'm sure he was sharp. So what about his question about diamond plate lubrication? I used to use diamond plates, and then I just stopped, and I think I caught the whiff of what Mike was saying, because I was finding scratches in my blades, and I was like, why is this happening? I'm working up through the grits, and I still have these scratches. And Mike said, it could be that, the diamond plate that you started with or whatever is created these deep scratches that you just don't see until, you get finer. And so I don't use my diamond plate anymore. But I used to use jojoba oil just because it was what I had on hand.
I took a class with Jenny Alexander years ago, and there on the diamond plates we used WD-40.
Oh.
But if I'm at all combining my diamond plate work with water stones, then to your point, water all the time. In fact, right now I use the diamond plates for when I'm dressing my scrapers pretty much, and it's always water. Yeah.
Yeah, ditto. Water. I mean, for that same reason, I do my initial grinding, I don't know, sharpening on 1,000 before I moved to a 4 and 8 combo Waterstone. And so I'm using water on the diamond plate because I don't want oil anywhere near my Waterstones. Yeah.
And also the water, it removes the swarf to keep it from building up, but it doesn't lubricate it unnecessarily. Like you still have a really aggressive cutting action because like an oil will actually, it sort of helps avoid abrasion, right? So it's kind of the opposite of what you want to be doing. So yeah, well, I think water's fine.
All right. Well, the next question comes from Lynn. And Lynn says, I've been using card scrapers for a little bit now. After reading Bob Van Dyke's article on Sharpening one in the latest Tools and Shops issue of Fine Woodworking, it got me thinking more about them. I'm curious, is there an ideal thickness to a scraper? I have 2 different ones and never could get the thin one to work well. Also, do you prefer using scrapers by hand or do you put it in a holder? And finally, how do you guys feel about scraping planes? They seem like they would be the best option when scraping. It's funny because I bought when I first bought the set of scrapers many years ago, I bought the Lee Nielsen set. So there's a thin one and a thicker one. I think that the thin one is 2/1000ths or of an inch thick, and the other one is 3/1000ths.
Get out. It's really thin.
Yeah, I think it's like 0.02 is the, and the other one is 0.032. Yeah. The 032 equates to a 0.8 millimeter. That's the heavy. Do you like the heavier one of the two?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I tend to use the heavier one, and I don't know why. This is a really interesting question because I always had that same thought. It's like, why are there 2 different thicknesses, And I used to think, I used the thinner one when I was scraping anything that had any kind of a subtle curve to it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plane. But then I started making my own curved scrapers, and then the thinner one kind of went back to the pocket. But I mean, Lee Nielsen on their website, they talk about the thinner one being used for supple scraping. And I'm not exactly sure what supple scraping is. Usually when I'm scraping, it's kind of like, I'm trying to get things done. So I don't know. I mean, I do know that the thinner one certainly heats up quicker.
Interesting.
If I'm doing a scraping session, that's the last one I want to touch because, I usually do it by hand and, it gets hot pretty quickly. And it also doesn't seem to hold the burr as long. It's easier to get a burr on it, but it doesn't last.
What do you use, Barry?
I use, what is it, the Sandvik, whatever Woodcraft sells.
Yeah.
I mean, and I haven't put much thought into it. I haven't experimented much, to be honest. I know the Crucible one is crazy thick.
Yeah.
And intentionally so. Like Chris isn't doing it. Well, Chris and John, and I forget the third person. They're not doing anything kind of from the hip.
That's got a curved profile to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that Sandvik you have, it's probably about that medium flex, about like the 0.8 millimeter, give or take. That's what I like. So I'm with you. The too thin, it's like too flimsy. And if I'm scraping flat surfaces, like it doesn't hold its shape well enough to give me a consistent cut all the way across. I don't like them too thick because I like to be able to flex them enough just to make sure that the corners are off. So I like that 0.8 millimeter. I have a bunch of scrapers and they're all exactly the same thickness.
I think I've relegated the thinner one because it can flex a little bit. I've used it quite often for getting into like a cabinet, trying to scrape out glue, squeeze out. But since I work with Garrett on this article about making little scrapers, I've made a bunch of little scrapers to do that job. So it's easier for me to reach in and get those corners. But it's an interesting question. I'm glad he asked.
Yeah, some people like the holders. Veritas makes that little holder, and it slips in so it keeps your fingers nice and cool. There's also a thumb screwer that allows you to sort of tension the scraper into a slight curve. If you don't have the hand strength to sort of maintain that curve yourself. Only reason I don't like that is the cool thing about the scraper is you have 4 cutting edges. And so as it heats up, I like to flip the scraper to get to either a fresh edge or a cooler edge. And I kind of work all 4 edges until they all need to be honed. Where if it's in a holder, I tend to beat the
Yeah.
bejesus out of that one
dust,
edge,
right?
and then I get a new one. So that's the only thing is I think it defeats the purpose of that multi-edge tool by really limiting you to just one edge.
But this is BVD. It's not me. He mentioned he loves the
Who's BVD?
feedback. Oh, sorry, Bob Van Dyke, author of the article mentioned. He loves the feedback. Like he gets as much of his thumbs are intentionally located and the hands are on the board, so he can feel the board and it helps him stay stable. And I'm not sure what the holder, not like a cabinet scraper, but what the holder does to help with that. But Bob loves the feedback of hand a tool to wood.
Yeah.
That's true, because you can feel. I mean, the scraper I use is for just getting rid of rough spots or really squirrely grain that I couldn't fix with my hand plane. But yeah, that is a good benefit of not using the holder, is you can kind of feel where the bumps or the points that you're trying to level are, even on a microscopic level almost. It's kind of cool. But I don't use a scraper plane. I do have a scraper, cabinet scraper, a Kuntz cabinet scraper that I use to scrape like big surfaces. Like if I'm trying to do it, if I have a tabletop and I'm trying to level like a glue line or something, or just any kind of a grain that needs to be cleaned up. But it's usually a bigger job for that.
It's more aggressive burr typically.
Yeah, it's not as much of a finesse tool. It's really for hogging away material. And one of the downsides of it, using it on a tabletop, is that you're losing all your flat surfaces.
Yes.
that I worked so hard to get. So I don't pull that out very often. It's just in emergency situations. But it works. For when I need it, it works well.
Yeah, I'll use that to hit my bench top every 2 years to get all the glue and finish off
A
of
cabinet
it.
scraper?
Yeah, that's the only
That's a
time
good
I
idea.
use it. It's
Yeah.
just a beast of a tool. It's a different animal than a card scraper. I don't
Yeah.
think they're really analogous. It's kind of a different tool.
Yeah, certainly doesn't leave as nice a surface. Like with a card scraper, you can get a nice glisten if you've got it sharpened.
Yeah.
and-
So is a scraper plane closer to a cabinet scraper than it is a card scraper?
Yeah,
then?
scraper plane. So you're talking with the handles fore and aft, like it was a Stanley 112 or something like that.
Yeah, and the blade sticking either straight up or
Right.
even kind of
Yeah,
forward a
it's
bit.
tilted forward. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's same difference as a cabinet scraper.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Right.
the front and rear soles gives you a little bit better bearing surface. I have one. I have a really nice one. I never actually put a blade in it. And then I finally bought a router plane that fit the space that.
Oh, that's what went?
Yeah, scraper plane fit. So that one in my drawer, and now my router plane lives where that thing
Nice.
used to live. And it's shiny, so it looks really cool.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next segment. It's time for the all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. And for this, I'll start with Mike.
Had a couple. I'll say both. One was so I'm working a lot of white oak, which I am prone to be doing, and the thought of planing white oak, if it's a little bit squirrely, can be super tough. So I put my 45-degree honed blade into my bevel up Veritas smoother, and it just totally kicked butt on that surface. And then that was a little bit dull because I did a lot of planing with it. I didn't want to sharpen it. So I had to do some stuff this morning. So I pulled out my Lee Nielsen 4.5 with a 55-degree frog and a
sweet.
5-degree back bevel on
Good
that
golly.
blade, which I never use because it's really hard to push. But man, that just like plowed through some squirrely grain. It feels like the most horrendous scraping feeling. Like I'm just tearing this thing up. It's like... And then you look and it's like glass smooth. It's like, how does that work? I don't know.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah,
So-
I've talked about my Veritas bevel up, and I have that specifically as a high angle plane now.
Yeah.
It's just I haven't bought another blade to convert it, but
I bought a spare blade for my bevel up jack just
Yeah.
for a squirrely grain.
Yeah,
it's an
worth it.
amazing revelation.
Right.
It's like if you've never done it and you have a budget to get that extra, if you have a bevel up plane, or go out and buy one, because I've used it on tiger maple projects, and I used to have a lot of trouble. I mean, I was spending all my time sanding to try to get the surface right, but these the high angle makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I'm so glad I didn't pick that tool for this podcast because I was pretty close.
Well,
I was close too because I was working with zebra wood on one of the other projects I'm building, and zebra wood is surprisingly squirrely. I mean,
Super stringy too.
It just the grain just pops out, and so I had to go to the high angle, and
it worked.
It fixed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not even my favorite tool of all time of the week.
Dang.
That's part one.
So you took one of mine just as like a power move? Was that?
now he's going to take yours.
Right, yeah.
So I teach I teach Kumiko quite a bit, and the chisel I use for making the little pieces is it's a chisel where you can't get anymore. It's not imported anymore, and there was nothing special about it per se. It was just a sharp chisel. It was a Japanese chisel. So I've been on a hunt to, okay, I really want to give people a legitimate buying recommendation other than just the size, because if you get like a cheaper chisel and it's really hard to tune up, it's not a good thing. It's going to not help you out. So I went to a reputable online tool dealer that deals in Japanese tools, and they actually had sort of a house brand tool. So this was like a 30 millimeter, 1.25 inch chisel. And the house brand was like $59. It's like, that's a pretty good price. Less than that, and I expect to have a kind of shoddy quality in terms of it's going to take a lot to maybe get the back flat or get it up and running. But I thought, $59. If this is good, that's a really good value. So I bought that one, and it took a little work. It took longer than I wanted to get the back flat. I probably spent 20 minutes on it, and I still had kind of a frosty corner by the time I hit my final polish. And it's just like, and also it's like, it got sharp. Like it's sharp, but like the hollow grind on the back wasn't really even. There was just little fit and finish things where it wasn't really what I would consider to be like a high quality chisel. So I went back to them, and I ended up buying a $99 chisel, same size, but this was by an individual maker. So kind of that's what the difference you're paying for between say $60 and maybe upwards of 75 to 100 is you got a guy making this who has probably been doing it for the last 60 years. And this chisel, that difference, the fit and finish was really nice. The weld, where it's a hammered weld basically between that hard layer of steel and the softer layer. You can typically tell the quality of a chisel by how clean that weld or that intersection of the soft and hard steel is. The other one was sort of wavy. This one was really, really straight with nice ears on the sides. So that was really clean. The grind on the back was really nice. The overall shape was good. It took maybe 5 minutes to get the back flat and sharp. And there's just something about it to where the differences in one sense was subtle. In another way, it was like night and day. It's like, why would I not spend, if I'm spending already 60, why would I not spend that extra $40 to get a chisel, which I think is in a completely different category. So that said, I had both of these completely sharp, the same size. And as I'm working and I needed something, a really sharp chisel, I went for the really good one. I said, no, I want to save that. And so I picked up this no-name chisel, and I kept using that because I wanted to save the really good one. So I don't know if my favorite tool of all time is the really good chisel, which I would recommend, or just this sort of, it's not a beater chisel, but the one I didn't care quite as much about, it wasn't as precious to me. I ended up using that all the time. So I don't know. It's so like funny. One or the other. So
That's too funny. I was doing the same thing. I've got I have the Veritas PMV11 chisels, but I also still have my blue marbles, and I have the 1/2 inch on my bench all the time, and I've been reaching for the blue almost like regularly because I don't want to ruin the edge on the middle.
Exactly.
I'm like,
yes.
What the heck am I doing here?
Yeah. And then
Anyway.
I felt a little bit better because I was having dinner with Toshio Date, who's the expert on Japanese tools, and I was asking him about his planes and stuff, and he says, I have this really, really nice plane, and he went on wax poetic about how wonderful this plane was, and he said, but I never use it. I use this one here all the time. That one I just kind of put aside. It's like, oh, thank you. So Although
Right.
he also said, like in his work, he doesn't like the dovetails scene at all. Like that's just his aesthetic, his tradition, and I respect that 100%. I obviously don't follow that. But he said dovetails are like underwear. They can be very fancy and very beautiful, but they shouldn't show.
Wow.
So, okay. Hence, I did not show him any like phone pictures of my latest work I make. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't listen to the podcast, so we're good.
All right. Oh, that's right. I have to go now. So my tool this week is the Veritas dowel former. And if you've never made your own dowels, it's a very satisfying thing.
Great.
So I'm one of the pieces I'm making, the trivets I'm making has a mortise and tenon on each end, and I wanted a nice little decorative pin in the center of, I guess, lack of a better word, the rails. These things are great because you can make these non-standard size dowels in small batches using like whatever scraps you have. So it's so cool to, I set this, if you're not familiar with it, it's a round plate that has these insert cutters that you put into the center of this plate. And I just placed the opening where that insert goes over one of my benchtop holes and put the piece of stock in, chamfer the tip a little bit so to get it started, and then I just whack away. It's just like, and the cool thing is, well, the hard thing is for me is keeping track when it gets down flush, when the material goes to the top of the insert, you can't pull the stock through. You've got to kind of poke it through. So I use a punch to do it. And the trick is watching where the dowel bounces when it comes out on the bottom of my bench, because it could shoot anywhere. And there were a couple times where I was like on my knees, like, where the hell did that thing go? Because I'm not great about sweeping up after every planing session, so I had shavings all over. But it's a really very satisfying thing to do. And if I were doing any kind of a big dowel job, I wouldn't use this. I wouldn't make my own dowels. But for really decorative things, it's a blast.
Yeah, it's super cool.
And because you're just doing scrap wood, if it doesn't, sometimes the grain, like the dowels will come out kind of curvy sometimes, depending on the wood. But I flick those away and then I grab another piece. It's very cool. It's very loud though. I find that I don't like banging as much as I used to.
It's surprisingly loud. I had to take mine outside, and I still kind of felt bad doing it.
I hate to admit it, but I actually put on headphones.
Yeah, I had hearing protection.
Because of that kind of freaked out my wife. She's like, "Are you okay?"
I find that if you cut your square stock not oversized, but exactly to the diameter of the hole, that helps. Because if you think, I'm just going to like make it a little 16th over and pound it through.
it doesn't. Sometimes you can shatter it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an art, and it's a nice brutal break from fine wood.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I hated that. I hated that mortise and tenon that I had to cut after or trim. After cutting it on the drill press, but it was kind of cool.
I also have like a little hand pencil sharpener, and I kind of sharpen, put that chamfer both on the front end and also the trailing edge too. Oh, because then it exits.
Right.
Dang it!
You don't have to smash the plate. But I like those Veritas ones because you can buy them as a set, but you can buy like the individual sizes. Yeah. So it's like I use 1/4 and 3/16 only, and then you can actually save money just by getting just those two insert sizes.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had done that. I wound up, but these sets, I can't remember what the price is. It wasn't that expensive. So, but it's super handy for those times where I want to make a fun decorative element.
Yeah.
But all right, anyone?
Well, I have a favorite tool, but never you mind if you want to just end the show.
We're moving on, dude.
Train left the station.
I thought I said your favorite tool for you.
I thought you already went.
No. So, all right, I'll make it fast.
Don't make it fast. Take your time.
No, take your time. We have all day.
Jeff's already asleep, so we can talk as long as we want.
Jeff is already editing the video.
So this one started out as a tool bomb, but then I got to know it a little better, and I love it.
Those are the best.
It felt so good. It is my Veritas Wonder Dog I have the Wonder Dog. It's It's a post that sticks in a dog hole, and it has the screw advance, so it kind of acts like a tail vise.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
And I got it after doing a shoot with Mason McBrien. He had the bench article in Tools and Shops, the simple bench, and he was using one. He's like, "This is great," and it's like $40. He goes, "And you have a tail vise, whenever you want." Like, oh, well, I'll buy that tomorrow, and I did, and it was frustrating because I was expecting a tail vise, just something out of the way at the end of the bench that you could. And this was the way you advance it. There's a little toggle at the end, but
Half
it hits
clunk,
the
half
bench, right?
clunk.
So half turn donk, and you get angrier and angrier with every little like donk, when it hits the bench.
Is there a quick release where you can adjust it close?
There is
Push
one
it
with
up.
a quick release.
Okay.
Not this one. I cheaped out, and I probably should not have. But then I just realized I'll just sight down from the top, and that helps me get it kind of in position. I can do full spins.
Got it.
With the toggle away from the bench.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that made it nice and tolerable.
Sure.
But then I used it to square up a carcass. And this was when I was like, oh, this is a fantastic tool, because otherwise I need a really long clamp to do corner to corner to bring something in. But I didn't have a clamp that long, and I don't know if I still do. So I just used the Wonder Dog. I put a dog pin, or what are they called? Bench dog.
Bench dogs,
in one corner, and the Wonder Pup at the other, and just racked it square, put the back on.
Diagonal corners, and you just...
And it was great, and I just got to dial it in because the thread was just so, I guess it's Acme thread.
Yeah.
But it was fantastic, and that's when I realized I love this tool. So now it
That's
hangs on my
cool.
tool wall.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So
You
Tool
went
and
first.
technique.
Yeah. That's good. Because I've got one of those and I never use it.
but that's why.
Okay.
I loved it, yeah.
Brilliant.
Sweet. All right. Well, let's wrap this puppy up.
You dog, you.
We'll hit some one listener comment that Ben really pushed me to read. This one comes from Ruggs, and Ruggs says, "I run a small wooden boat shop in the northern suburbs of Boston. While my town has a great history of wooden boats and craftsmen, it's hard to find people with similar interests in the depths of being a nerd about tool selection, scrap wood hoarding, and the lines between nice power tool efficiency and hand tooling fits and finish. A few weeks ago, I gave your podcast a try. I've never been into a podcast before, and I'm hooked. Lots of great tips and general banter, which reminds me of groups I used to work with in bigger shops before I struck out on my own. Lunch discussions about a certain tool not working right, or comparing that time you almost died, figuratively and sometimes literally. Anyway, thanks for putting these conversations out there for all of us." Well, thanks for the great comment.
Right on.
So that's it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you have questions you'd like us to answer on the next one, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening. We're out.
Back at the con.
It's weird.
Who manned the Enterprise before Kirk? What was his name?
No one remembers.
Pike.
Pike.
Christopher Pike.
Christopher Pike.
That's right.
You're like Christopher Pike.
Isn't that the name of the actor of the current captain on the Star Trek movies? Christopher Pike? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And he was the male lead in Wonder Woman. But isn't his name Christopher Pike? Like in real life.
Oh.
Like if you were to go get a beer with him.
Sure.
No, I confuse him. There are a couple characters that I confuse, like actors that I confuse him with, like the guy that played Thor,
Because there's
Chris Hemsworth.
Hemsworth.
then there's Chris Pratt, Chris Pine, Chris Pike.
That's
Chris
what
Pine.
it is. It's Pine,
Yes,
not Pike.
Pike.
Okay.
That would have been cool.
That would have been really cool.